Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Asia Solar Energy for Climate Change Conference, a platform dedicated to harnessing the power of renewable energy in our fight against climate change. The conference is organized by Carbon Care Inner Lab. My name is Ringo Mack, and I'm honored to be your moderator for this insightful panel discussion. The session today will be focused on solar storage in Asia, turning solar power, solar energy oversupply into opportunity. So the background of this session is Asia has witnessed remarkable growth in solar energy production, with several countries reporting a period of oversupply where solar generation exceeds immediate demand without adequate storage solutions. This surplus energy is often wasted, highlighting the need for scalable and cost-effective storage technologies. Solar energy systems such as batteries, pumped hydro storage, and emerging hydrogen technologies offer an opportunity to transform oversupply into a valuable resource for stabilizing grids, supporting energy-intensive industries, and creating new economic opportunities. So our objective of this session is to explore the economic and environmental potential for solar storage solutions in transforming solar energy oversupply into a strategic asset for sustainable growth in Asia. So I'm proud to present you our three distinguished speakers to share their views in their respective country and respective organization. To begin with, lady first, Car. Car is an emerging voice in Southeast Asia's clean energy landscape, with a strong focus on inclusive energy transition and youth engagement in climate policy. Car, say hi.
Hello, everyone. My name is Caroline. Yeah.
The second one is Dr. Audi. Dr. Audi is the Research and Development Director at Youth for Energy Southeast Asia, a youth-led collective that serves as a platform to empower, advocate, and connect youth to bring a just and sustainable energy future in the region. Hi, Dr. Audi.
Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Okay. The last one would be Philip. Philip Maplemore is McDonald's energy sector's leader for Asia, responsible for the group's regional support to clients on the global energy transition. Hi, Philip, say hi.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you.
Okay, so our arrangement is that after each speaker share their PowerPoint, we will have a moderating session, and then down below, we have a Q&A box. So any participant can drop down their note and then put it in the Q&A. Our back office and each of the speaker can check the Q&A. Then during the moderation section, I will bring up the Q&A to answer the participants' question. Okay, so just wait. And then during the session, only the particular speaker will share his view. Okay, so without further ado, may I introduce Philip to begin your sharing. Philip, please.
Okay, thank you. So hopefully everyone can hear me clearly and see the screen. So as kindly introduced by Ringo, I'm Mott McDonald's energy sector lead for the Asia region. I've been based here for most of the last 20 years working on clean energy projects. And I see a strong case that there's never been a more exciting time in terms of the energy transition. I'd like to share today some practical case studies of some transformative projects that we've been involved in. But to lead into this, I'll give a brief summary of some of the mega trends that are making these changes possible to put us all on the same page. Briefly on Mott McDonald, we're a large international technical consultancy, and in the Asia region, we've supported many gigawatts of clean energy and energy storage and energy transmission. So we have teams across the region supporting large-scale projects primarily. So there's many articles in the press on the astounding falling costs for renewable power, and there's data from many different international organizations showing a similar picture. I want to start with one set of data which I think clearly shows the trend. This is a recent article on technology learning curves by an Oxford professor, Max Rosa. It's a kind of simplified view. There's an article in the link. I'd recommend the full article if you want to understand, learning curves in more detail. What we see on the left is the cost per unit of energy generated without storage. And you can see solar has come down most steeply, as you'd expect. It shows 88% in 15 years, and there's other data around showing, it's easily got to a tenth of its original cost over the recent decades. And you see the similar on the right-hand side for batteries. This is actually showing cost per unit of battery cell capacity. You could see the same thing if you were looking per unit of kilowatt hour of effective storage. And so this is only cells. The same thing would apply. The same trend would apply for the overall system that's installed. And if we look even more recently, if we look even more recently in 2024, we can see from ARENA data that the whole system cost of batteries that have been installed has dropped 93% from. So I mean, huge cost reductions, and that leads into what we're seeing on this slide here. Solar and onshore wind power are now lower cost than alternatives for 96% of new global capacity, so lower cost than thermal power alternatives. That's been true since 2023. More recent data from last month shows significantly lower costs. So the International Renewable Energy Agency is showing that onshore wind is now, as a global average, under half the cost of fossil fuels, and solar is now 41% lower cost. And the cost advantage is even higher in Asia. So that's great. Renewables is cheaper, but it's subject still to this maximum grid penetration limit. How much solar and wind can you have on the grid as long as the output is variable, when it's producing when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. Now, there's lots of ways that that variability can be addressed using flexibility services, stronger grids, energy storage. Energy storage has been used for many, many years already to manage that variability, support grids. What it hasn't been used for in the past is to allow a solar plant to replicate the output profile of a thermal power plant. So that's quite new. And that's coming on to point 4. The possibilities for cost competitively storing intermittent energy with batteries to extend solar well beyond daylight hours is now at a tipping point. And we're going to share one case study of a big solar project in the Southeast Asia region that's competitive with coal and gas-fired plant over around 12 hours per day. There's also a nice case study of the world's first 24-hour solar and battery storage, which was announced in January in Abu Dhabi. And we see this in the context of many countries not only having their own decarbonization or carbon reduction targets, but also having economic opportunities to generate stable renewable power for industry. So how exactly is battery energy storage helping us to integrate solar? As we've said, there are many use cases of batteries to address intermittency and more generally to provide support to the grid. But I want to focus here on this concept of 24-hour solar. And what we can see on the left is the orange curve for a solar generation on a clear sky day, up to a peak midday output. And that's in a gray box representing 24 hours. So it's clearly only daytime and it's not consistent during the day. And this is a clear sky day. If it was a cloudy day, that would be more choppy, more broken up. So the orange curve is only filling up about a quarter of the gray box. Generally, a good PV system can generate up to the equivalent of around 20%, as you see on the bottom left there, of the hours in the year, so a fifth of the year. And the opportunity here is to change that into 100%, as you can see on the right. And you add more solar and you add battery to do that. And this is a more obvious representation of how that happens. You're increasing that peak and you're storing the energy that is above the dashed line so that it's used and dispatched at outside of daylight hours. So this is some analysis by Ember. It's one set of data, just one scenario. It's going to be sensitive to where you install it and costs in a given region, but it does show what's becoming possible. And this is that a solar plus battery system generating almost all the hours of the year, so 97% of the hours in the year, can be lower cost than coal, and a solar plus battery system generating for 60% of the hours in the year, so more than 12 hours a day, is competitive with gas. This is based on US fuel prices. And this is not just hypothetical. And I think the really interesting part of this presentation is to share the case study projects where this is already happening. So this is a large project in the Philippines, and we mean large. This is 3.5 gigawatts peak of solar and 4.5 gigawatt hours of battery. So at the time it was signed, this was the biggest battery in the world. A result that will clearly be superseded very quickly by others. You're installing that in order to generate a firm output of up to 850 megawatts by 2027. So clearly there's a lot more solar installed than you need to generate because you're storing that in the batteries. This was cost competitive with thermal power. Groundbreaking occurred last November and local financing closed in April. And the total cost was 2.7 billion US dollars. There's a number of challenges that come with this kind of project. A lot of them are around just sheer logistics and supply chain challenges of deployment at this scale. And there's many valuable learnings. I think we can address most of those in the questions. The key point for me would be, for this context, is how do you design to meet the firmed dispatch requirements? You know, how is this replicable for other projects, including projects at small scale? Another great example is the projects where Singapore was given conditional awards to import renewable power from neighboring islands in Indonesia, from the Riau Islands. You can see here that the concept is that you'd have solar and batteries on an island. You would have high voltage exports through a subsea cable into Singapore, where the power will be used. So there'll be various cables coming into Singapore from different islands following different routes, all of them aiming to bring in firmed renewable power. In total, Singapore has awarded 7 concessions, totaling 3.4 gigawatts of firm power. Again, there's clear challenges around the rollout of these projects at this scale in isolated areas and with new subsea cables crossing busy sea lanes. But I want to focus here on 2 other points. The first is the new solar and battery manufacturing capacity. All of these projects will be delivered using PV modules and batteries manufactured in Indonesia, and that requires a whole new supply chain. So there's great opportunity there to really ramp up regional supply of this equipment, and a challenge in doing that in the right timescales. The second point I wanted to emphasize is the extent of power firming. So how much do you firm this? You know, how many hours a year are you generating that 3.4 gigawatts? Because the more hours per year, the more the cost will go up. So there's a balance here with affordability. Singapore's initial government target from their first request for proposals was to have steady imports 3/4 of the hours of the year, so 75% plant load factor. And that may work with different technology combinations, for example, with hydropower or pump storage hydropower, but that is very much straining the limits of what's cost competitive with solar battery right now. That limit will keep changing as the battery costs keep going down, as the solar costs keep going down. But right now there is that affordability kind of balance. So key messages here, what are the implications of adding firm solar? What are the new opportunities and challenges? And what kind of framework is needed to make that possible, including for the supply chain? So I'll wrap up there and leave it for the questions. So I've focused here on gigawatt scale projects, but this kind of solution is also scalable, and we're expecting many more projects of this type at all scales. We're excited to see ever more projects expanding the realm of what's possible. I trust this snapshot has provided some new insights for you all, and look forward to the panel discussion.
I think you're still muted, Ringo.
Sorry, back office problem. Well, thank you, Philip. The Philippine project is amazing. I'm sure a lot of the participants will have a follow-up question on that. Okay, now we would invite Dr. Audi to share his PowerPoint. Okay, Dr. Audi, your time.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, and is my audio audible or is it a bit quiet? Let me change my microphone. Okay, I think this should be a bit louder. All right, hi everyone. Thank you so much, Ringo, and the conference organizers for having us, Youth for Energy Southeast Asia here. Our slide hopefully is going to be quick, and basically we want to transition from what Philip presented earlier on how the sort of optimism around solar plus battery is building up on a large megawatt scale system. We want to build on that and propose a different perspective and viewpoint from our end, which is off-grid solar and batteries are two combinations that are bringing about what we call the next wireless revolution in Southeast Asia. And I'll tell you a bit more why we're calling it this. So ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which is the focus of our research scope, it has made incredible strides to deliver electricity access in their own member state countries. The most recent ASEAN Energy Outlook's AMS target scenario expects 100% universal household electricity access by 2040. And 4 out of 10 member states, which are what we would call the developed Southeast Asia, like Brunei, Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand, have already achieved 100%. But then 6 out of the 10 remaining countries are just on the final stretch to get there. Bar Myanmar, of course, which have faced humanitarian challenges and internal turmoil. You see Cambodia, Laos, Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam see less than 10% of their population remaining without reliable electricity access, according to official statistics. Of course, the challenge that probably keeps these countries' energy ministers awake at night is getting that last few legs of population, which unfortunately we're talking about millions of people unserved living in the most remote islands, mountainous regions, and really scattered rural communities. If you see on the map here, it's particularly challenging for a country where I come from, Indonesia, as well as the Philippines, with a lot of different islands scattered. At the same time, based on what has been reviewed by the ASEAN Energy Outlook, there has been a notably historical trend for governments in the region to focus more on large capacity installation projects, which obviously, as we know, would require more time between commissioning to delivering that last mile of electricity. And that also brings us to the next point of this sort of like tendency for a more top-down approach, which is still most preferable in this remaining holdouts, where grid extensions are still these sort of priority policies. And then for those villages that do eventually get access to electricity in a lot of these countries, remote areas, they're usually non-grid connected systems, and their existence has been propped up by tenuous non-governmental projects. And by tenuous, I mean it's not obviously at the scale of having the capital to maintain it constantly as you would with a government budget. Now, this is where we sort of transition a bit with the concept of off-grids, something that is not necessarily new. The World Bank published this report a few years back where they basically highlight that decentralized systems do not need to conflict with central government grid plans, and they're basically two practical and complementary approaches to grid extensions that have the potential for exponential growth curves. The report does recognize that programs that by governments have traditionally focused on extending the national grid, but then that's why they're offering that for the next few 500 million people, mini grids and off grids are really the way to go, because then extending the grids can be proven expensive, slow in remote settlement areas with low population densities, and it could have low demand for electricity. And this is where China's massive solar production changes everything. As you see, China's massive solar glut has been changing the game, creating the perfect condition for this sort of off-grid solar revolution. China is home to 85% of the global solar manufacturing plants, and an Ember report last year suggests that ramping up products from all these plants could even help the world meet our 2030 target of tripling renewables capacity, solving access to injustice in the global south. So I'm very happy I'm not the only one quoting an Ember report. I saw Philip quoting another report from Ember earlier. This was another different report on China's solar production glut. And even under the sort of global trade disputes that we're seeing now, the race for solar as a cheap, quick, deployable, and most importantly, wireless consumer source of energy remains high. Based on the data from Ember, which tracks the solar exports coming out of China, although cumulative panel exports have fallen year on year in the first 6 months of 2025 by 5.2%, cell and wafer exports, which are the materials that could make solar PVs, have actually increased and making up nearly half of all Chinese solar product exports. And so far this year, 208 gigawatts equivalent of solar products have been exported out of China, which is more than twice of Germany's total installed solar capacity by the end of 2024. So that's a huge amount of solar coming out of China, sent all over the world. And so this is the chart that presents that figure. As you can see, the share of panels being sold are reducing, again, due to these global trade disputes, but you have the subcomponents and the materials that are being exported instead. So where is all this solar going? Well, as I mentioned earlier, everywhere across the world. But one particular country which has been in the spotlight recently is Pakistan, where you would see headlines like this saying that there's a sort of quiet solar rush, which is putting pressure on the national grid. And what's happening here in Pakistan is that you're seeing a country with 240 million people where citizens are executing a grassroots energy transformation in the past 2-3 years without waiting for the government or incumbent utilities. Just for context, Pakistan's installed electricity capacity is 48 gigawatts. But of course, these have been faced with blackouts and price hikes due to the fossil fuel-based generation. And in the last 2 years, Pakistani citizens and businesses have imported 32 gigawatts of solar panels, which is 68% against that 46 installed capacity in the country. And most of this ends up being off-grid. This story on the right here covers how a household would buy a panel, an inverter, and a battery packet for about $630 US. That's in Pakistan. We believe this is also happening in Southeast Asia too, although we're not facing the sort of same economic pressures that the citizens of Pakistan are with electricity price hikes. We are seeing that this is happening to hit that last mile across those countries that I mentioned earlier, where rural electrification, electricity access is still low. and we're still doing a scoping study on this in the details to figure out how much solar coming out of China is actually being installed. But when we look at the data on the aggregate level, based off that exported data, an equivalent of 55.2 gigawatts of solar products have already been exported from China to various ASEAN countries. And all the ASEAN countries, 10 member states, have been recipients of China's solar products, from panels to wafers and cells. Indonesia have been the largest recipients, receiving about 14 gigawatts and 11 gigawatts, respectively, with Vietnam. And then when we track across the 7.5 years of data available in this Ember data, which is between 2017 and 2025, ASEAN has cumulatively received 270 gigawatts of solar product equivalent. Now, guess how much central solar capacity is installed across ASEAN, as reported by official figures? 30.5 gigawatts. So you can see that contrast. 270 gigawatts is already exported to China across Southeast Asian countries, but then the installed solar capacity across ASEAN is only 30.5 gigawatts. Of course, the caveat is a lot of ASEAN countries like Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam are transit zones before these things get exported again, which is why we're doing the scoping study at Y4E to see in details how much is being exported and how much is actually being installed for these rural areas. And the reason, and more reason to believe that is because you see all these off-grid installations are happening all across Southeast Asia. This is a program by Enter Nusantara, which is a partner youth organization focusing on climate that has been going to villages and rural, electrifying rural areas with solar panels supported by their funders. You see this happening as well in the Philippines and then in Laos. And so what we're seeing is these off-grid installations are also happening at the same time as these solar exports that are massive, and they're transforming these unserved areas which are previously untapped by central utilities. And we see this as a story now eerily similar to Pakistan, except without the economic pressures, as I mentioned. Of course, the question is then, so what, and why is this important? Well, we believe that there's a new technological revolution at play, and how we deal with it will determine Southeast Asia's energy future. So I'm gonna come here to everyone. I want to see nods from Ringo or Philip or Kat to help me out here. You guys remember these, right? These are called telephones, landlines. They connect to a cable. What we're seeing is a deja vu on an epic scale. Southeast Asia, mainly developing Southeast Asia, has already proved that leapfrogging works, right? A lot of Southeast Asia skipped landlines and went straight to smartphones, if you're not aware. And the same geographic challenges that made landlines impossible, islands, mountains, scattered communities, are now making centralized grids seemingly, potentially as well, economically unfeasible. But just like mobile phones, distributed energy offers a solution. So we're not just witnessing an energy revolution, we're watching the energy sector, to our view, follow the exact same leapfrogging playbook that created Southeast Asia's digital revolution. So, of course, this is not the end of the story. Yes, let's say this sort of wireless revolution is happening, but then there's another frontier that needs to be faced by this region, which are batteries. And we think that if battery prices have dropped to a certain degree, especially modular decentralized batteries, we're not talking about mini grid batteries, but the kind of batteries like a Tesla Powerwall that gets installed at your homes, if those drop to a significant point, we can see that large-scale installations will be less feasible, just because there's a tendency, of course, for the markets to then avoid the massive infrastructure costs, following that sort of same logic. And then we further back this argument with a study that was done in Ghana. We haven't found a study similar to this in Southeast Asia yet, but in Ghana, at least, beyond a certain kilometers of grid extensions, it proved to be more expensive for grid extensions compared to just a hybrid genset with solar system that is off-grid, for instance. And so once we see this sort of modular and scalable batteries happen, we believe that this wireless revolution is going to take hold even further. Of course, when we talk about the share of energy storage market in Southeast Asia, right now, majority, over 80% is still held by utility scale for the commercial and industrial segment, whilst the residential and household sectors share remains small. And partly the reason to this is just buying power. Quoting a China-based battery company named Lithium Storage, Southeast Asian residential energy market tends to be a sinking market for now. Its users still have relatively weak purchasing power and are more price sensitive. Again, a Tesla Powerwall, for example, is still expensive. But once that prices start dropping for the modular and tiny scale systems, then we might see this taking off even further. So what do we recommend then for the utility companies? Because the Pakistan story was interesting. What's happening now in Pakistan is the central utilities have to hike prices for those that are already connected to the grid to recuperate the losses from those that are going off grid. So we are suggesting that utilities would really need to start thinking about changing their business model, or at least transition to a different sort of business model, the same way telecommunications companies change their model from cents to minutes to cents per megabyte or subscription-based models, right? And so these are the examples of two simple subscription-based models that I think could be proven useful for utility companies. And so we're already seeing this somewhat with battery as a service in EVs. And then in the US, there have been subscription-based electricity companies that are providing a one-time fee for electricity usage all across the month. And so to put it simply, if you give a customer a $5,000 battery system and charge them $100 to $200 a month for energy services, for the utilities, you'll get a 3-4 year payback with distributed grid assets and so on. And so this shouldn't be just a theoretical thing. Again, this is the telecommunications playbook, and this is something that we believe could be adopted by energy and utilities companies. Thank you so much, Ringo. I'll pass it over back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Audi. It's very encouraging hearing your presentation. I wish most of the people in your different country can really switch from this ordinary landline kind of energy supply to this self-sufficient, personalized power supply. That will be a dream come true, truly. And I already see some questions addressing your PowerPoint. Okay, so we'll touch on that later. Okay, now is the time for the lady. Okay, Car, would you mind to share your finding in Vietnam? Car, please.
Okay, so I'll share my screen now. Okay, so I hope you all can see my screen and can hear me well. Yeah, so hello everyone. My name is Kang Nguyen from Amperes, and I'm the Energy Transitions Program Coordinators. Firstly, I want to thank Carbon Care Innovat for inviting me to this event to share about my work at Amperes. So today I will be talking about how we can turn supply into opportunities, and more particularly is what policy pathway can enable distributed solar to strengthen energy security. So before we dive in, let me share quick introductions about Amperes. We founded in 2015 with offices in Vietnam and Australia. And recently we become a part of Alluvium Group, and our missions always have been clear, is to deliver solutions that enable communities to access their own clean energies and water resources. And since 2017, we work with communities in Vietnam, Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos to helping them to improve livelihood through distributed energy systems. And we're currently active in more than 11 Pacific, with the focus on 3 key is energy policy and planning, feasibility studies, and decarbonization strategies. And in the pictures is our event to one of our big events in the field of energy planning that we work with Australians government and Vietnamese governments to enhance the energy strategies towards the clean energy's futures. So to start with the topic today, we'll have a quick look on the energy's context of Vietnam. And in 2024, the total power capacity of Vietnam just reached 82,400 megawatts. And with a very rapid electricity demand growth, 10% before, to meet the economic growth that reached 7%, making our country one of the fastest in Asia in terms of economic electricity growth. And it's projected that if our GDP growth is 8% in 2025, the total electricity output required to support the economy is expected to increase around 12% next year. And this creates a very stress on our capacity. So we have a look at our power mix profiles. We still rely on the coal with over 30% of our capacity in 2024 is to rely on coal, and the hydropower is losing reliability due to climate change. But the positive thing is the share of renewable is still really high, account for 26% of power mix, and the renewable is also growing fast, in particular solar. In the periods of 2018 to 2021, we have deployed over 16 gigawatt of solar thanks to the feed-in tariff, but this also creates strains on our transmission systems. So in 2023, our governments set an ambitious power development plan 8 that set the target toward 2030 that the capacity will reach 150,000 megawatts in total, and with a very high share of renewable energies. However, by 2024, it became clear that the capacity gaps were already emerging to meet these targets. And with very hard to base focus on fossil fuels, hydropower is often more than 40 gigawatts in just 5 years targets. But this is when distributed energies come up with the achievable capacity gap 24.5 gigawatt, focus on onshore winds, flexible storage, power import biomass, and also solar PV. And to recently, this year, 2025, we released the revised versions of Power Development Plan 8. Here, the most notable change here is increase the overall aiming for around approximately 200,000 megawatt by 2024 for the total capacity. And along with this increase in the total installed capacity, solar powers are target to substantial increase from 12,000 megawatts in the original versions of PDP-8 to around 46,000 to 73,000 megawatts in both low and high scenarios. And it's not just PV solar. We also increase the target for storage batteries from 300 megawatts in the original versions of power development plans to 10,000 to 16,000 megawatts in the new versions of our power development plans. So the questions right now is, with this high percentage of renewable energies, the question is not just if, but how these distributed resources like solar and storage batteries can be integrated to relieve the congestions and strengthen resilience of the power system and deliver flexibilities for the national energy markets. So this one is called to distributed solar, as it can help release risk congestions, provide resilience in industrial zone, support and demand side flexibility. So to answer the questions, how do we enable these technologies? It's not just about how megawatt we need to deploy in the future, but it's also depends on the policy to enable the technologies. And with this, Australia can provide a very clear benchmark. Here's in this slide, we can see that by early 2024, solar contributed 25% of the generations, and rooftop solar alone make up over 11% for solar, and the solar capacities in Australia is surpassing the coal. And here we can imply the three relevant lessons for Vietnam and also for Southeast Asian country, that the first is solar is now the cheapest and the first and the fastest source to deploy. And the second lesson is the rooftop solar mobilize households capital and ease the burden on the state utility as well as corporates investor. And the third is, if it's managed well, rooftop solar is not liable but also a valuable asset for the grid. And the difference lies in the policy design to enable these technologies. With this, we come up with 4 policy considerations, draw on Australians' lessons to integrate distributed solar and batteries in the system. And the first considerations is the investment environments that discovery tools such as contract for difference or reverse auctions can ensure that the cheapest projects can enter the pipeline easily. And these mechanisms give investors certainties, de-risk their commitment, and create a steady flow of capital into the energy sector. And the second consideration is the market design. We need a fair and transparent wholesale markets where renewable and distributed resources can compete and equally we also need a dedicated market for essential service like frequency control, reverse voltage support, and without these essential service, the flexible assets like storage, batteries will remain under incentivized, even though they are vital for balancing the solar too. And the third is the safe integration of renewable into the system. We can say that distributed resource must be guided by technical standards and coordination framework properly. Otherwise, the very assets mean to stabilize our system could destabilize the system. And our final considerations is the resilience of the power system across the nation. At the community level, policy must empower vulnerable groups like women, ethnic minorities to active participations in the transition. At the asset level, projects must undergo climate assessment adhered to international standards. And at level, policy must integrate a resilience into planning, that we should incorporate a long-term weather risk assessment into our planning for the system, because it's not just about building capacity, it's also about the durabilities of the system. And to conclude, distributed solar and storage policy also need policy tools to enable themselves, not just technologies. And with the right enabling framework like financing mechanism, competitive markets, and integration standards, as well as the resilience strategies, I believe that Southeast Asia can transform the solar oversupply into a very valuable asset to ensure the energy security. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ka. Okay, thank you for sharing your kind of discovery and the development in Vietnam. Okay, now we could invite more questions from the floor. Actually, we got a few, and the guests have answered some of them directly. But I will repeat it because this would seems more other people would have the same question. Okay, so we welcome question for the time being. In fact, I would really like to ask Philip, because your project is really amazing according to the question, and then our own team also find it very amazing. So the Philippine project, how would you compare to the traditional coal plant? So investment wise is like what, close to 3 billion US, is a huge investment. So it's a kind of government act or individual investor act?
Yeah, so if we talk about traditional fossil fuel plants, whether coal or gas, they can operate in different ways. And some of them will operate base load, so they'll operate for the majority of the year, maybe 90% of the hours of the year. Some of them will operate what we call mid-merit, which is probably somewhere between 50 and 80% of the hours of the year. And they're aiming to operate flexibly to fill periods of higher demand, not peak demand, but higher demand. And so far, the solar battery is able to be cost competitive on this project against that mid-merit project at the lower end of the mid-merit range of around 50%, possibly 60% project load factors. So that's, in a way, that's how it compares with the fossil plant in terms of operation. Originally, it was actually bid against a set of criteria established for fossil plants. So it aimed to comply with all the criteria that were already applied in the Philippines for fossil power plants. Clearly, the capital cost is much higher, and then there's no fuel cost, right? That's the difference against a coal or a gas plant. In terms of whether the cost competitiveness takes into account transmission and grid management, I mean, the answer is effectively yes. It's comparable with a thermal power plant in terms of its output profile. That's the basis of the power supply agreement. And that's obviously the big difference from when we typically look at solar and wind costs. You know, when I showed that graph from, you know, I think it was an IEA graph or an IRENA graph showing the change in solar and wind costs over time, that doesn't take into account the transmission costs and the grid management costs. So the change that we're seeing is that solar and possibly onshore wind too can become cost competitive in that mid-merit range, including the grid services element, and will increasingly expand its range, possibly up to base load. And the Masdar project that I mentioned in Abu Dhabi is 24/7. So it is aiming to fill that, to exactly fill that requirement that a base load fossil plant can do.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting, really, for such big investment. And then I am so glad that the government and this big investor have the foresight to look into this matter seriously. Okay, now we turn to Dr. Audi for your kind of a mini and then the off-grid system. So how would you compare to this huge, Philips' huge investment? What would be the ROI, return on investment, by maybe individual company, maybe by the county administrator? So how would you rank the kind of a return on investment that individual investor can be viable to invest into this off-grid and mini renewable system?
All right, so that's a loaded question. It's kind of heavy, and I would not know the answer to the immediate ROI right now when we're doing comparisons. But just to touch upon a bit about, I guess, the opportunity cost of really pushing for these off-grid systems versus investing in large-scale installations. That, referring back to the World Bank report on mini grids for 500 million people, to some extent, if we're thinking about delivering immediate electricity access for those underserved regions, waiting on the availability of capital for large-scale installations, as well as the time between the build and development all the way to that last mile, extending those grid extensions, is really just depending on how you would view the political cost of not giving electricity to people, which is if you're a government, if I would position myself as an energy minister, it would be beneficial for me to turn the lights on for as many people as I could as quickly as possible, and obviously for democratic countries in Southeast Asia, that buys you votes, right? Putting lights on people's houses. So that would be the way I see it. And therefore, when it comes to the government policies, again, referring back to that report, this does not need to be an either-or situation between an off-grid system and a centralized grid system. This could be done in parallel, but then with the limited capital that a lot of these developing economies would have, you can start with the mini grids or off-grid systems, and then eventually build them onto the grid once you collect more central government budget to push for that.
Thank you. Because actually, I could bring up one of the questions you already answered. Okay, is it allowed in your country, like Indonesia or Cambodia, that this off-grid system or mini solar plant is legally to build and sell the power to others? Because in country like Hong Kong, we cannot. It's monopolized. So what is the status in your kind of countries?
Yeah, so I'm not sure how it is. Yeah, maybe I want to get back to you later on that. That's interesting that in Hong Kong that you can't install your own solar panels at your own homes. But within the study that we've had and scoping so far across Southeast Asia, off-grid systems, meaning not connected to the central utilities lines, are generally allowed. And most of the regulations that are controlling the amount of panels that you can install on your rooftops are mainly for grid connected systems, and they are usually, the argument is to ensure grid stability, similar to, I guess, what happened in Vietnam. You install a lot of solar, and then you would have, unfortunately, curtailment as the sort of consequence. But then off-grid systems, as long as they're not connected, it's like, again, it's installed in your own home. You can even install it in the privacy of your own home without anyone noticing, for instance. And there are successful examples. I just pasted an article from the Institute of Essential Services Reform, ISR, a local think tank based in Indonesia, where they also promoted how there are 3 different ASEAN countries that have promoted these off-grid systems. And then I guess to transition to that second question by Angus, I guess, on the hurdles and challenges, we want to focus more on the sort of hurdles on the consumer side. And at least based on that China battery company that I quoted earlier, aside from the lack of purchasing power with the current cost of modular batteries, there is that lack of expertise. They don't know which batteries to install. They don't know if these batteries are safe at home and whatnot. But we believe that with stronger marketing efforts and then push by the governments, as done with the previous ASEAN countries, we can get that technical know-how embedded into the society, just like how, megapixels on a camera, you look back 20, 30 years ago, I don't think the average individual knows, but then it became a common knowledge as smartphones became a mainstream.
Correct. To clarify my point, Hong Kong is allowed for you to different household to install your own off-grid power PV, renewable power, but you are only allowed to serve yourself or your neighbors, but you are not allowed to compete with the utility companies. Okay, so that is the hurdle. And Hong Kong is very special. It's a very tiny place. How about Vietnam? Because Carl, you mentioned about before our meeting, you have some note that is the curtailment also happening in Vietnam is because of the infrastructure. So is there any way that the things are improving or still kind of hurdle to the development of the renewable energy?
Yes, so in Vietnam, we also have a solar booms in the periods of 2018 to 2021, and with the fits in tariff mechanisms, and it's caused a lot of after that we have a lot of solar capacity adding to the capacities, but the grid is not ready for the amount of renewable energies for the penetration. So right now, is shifting to the market-based mechanism with more PPAs and reverse auctions, and also cost relaxed tariffs for energies. And lately, we have more decrees and regulations that allow self-consumptions and self-productions renewable energies that if we don't have the controllable capacity, we can deploy and install rooftop solars on every households and residence, but we cannot sell peer-to-peer among mini grid systems. But we have the PPAs mechanism which allow trading of powers among renewable generator and lot consumers. And right now, for the policy environments here, we are updated with the new degrees on the PPAs, and this will allow more participant of private investor to join into the energies market. But right now we still have more time to research how to scale up distributed solar for the future.
Thank you. Thank you. In fact, okay, I would like to bring up one question that already answered by Philip. It's from Selena Lin. She asked, does the LCOE take into account the transmission costs and grid management costs? Would that still be higher for new renewables? Philip, maybe you can share your answer to all the audience.
Sure. I mean, I think that's what I was implying before, is that electricity, the lifetime cost of generation from renewables, those figures don't include the costs of the grid or flexibility services to accommodate those renewables on the grid. And those costs change depending on how much renewables are on the grid. If there's less than 10% on a central grid, probably very, very low costs. As you get towards very high penetration levels of renewables, the costs change. They also change depending on how you manage the grid. So, ultimately, the more renewables on the grid, the higher those costs will go, unless you have flexibility services or this kind of energy storage that allows you to firm your renewables. And that's what these examples of firmed solar in the Philippines and in Abu Dhabi show, is what is the cost in those cases after you take out the cost of running the grid and accommodating the renewables within the power dispatch system. So
got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you, Philip. Okay, we have one. I think time is really running out. We have one last kind of a comment from Raymond Ho. I think is our expert in renewable energy. Hello, Raymond, if I'm not mistaken. Raymond actually addressed to my point is in Hong Kong, you can build off-grid system for individual. Correct. That's 100% correct. There's no wheeling charge mechanism established to sell electricity from one on-grid system into any user. Correct. Instead, the two utilities, that means the CLP and the Hong Kong Electricity, will buy all renewable energy on grid. That's true. That means you can serve yourself, but you cannot sell to other labor in cash. Okay, so that is my understanding too. Okay, I think it's perfect timing. Now is 35 minutes after 5. And I would like to sincerely thank all our 3 speakers for sharing their good development of their respective experience. And I hope the momentum can go on, because tomorrow there will be another several sessions regarding about the Asian renewable energy. So for now, I would say thank you and goodbye. Bye, Philip. Bye, Carl. Bye, Dr. Audi.
Everyone, thank you so much for having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.